and introduce our guest and what we're talking about.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we're flipping the show a little backwards than we would ordinarily do it, compared to the one show that we had so far. So I think the viewers who have followed Ted and I in our careers, I think you're familiar with this particular person. I'm going to pop him up on screen and then we'll introduce him properly here. Let me make sure I got all my boxes just right, because it's a new show and we have a lot of kinks to still work out. All right there. That's Professor Glenn Diesen at the University of Oslo. He's a professor of political science and history there. His newest book is out now. It is called The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
So we're going to talk to you about something a little different than we would ordinarily pick your brain about. In this case, let's start with your personal experience very recently and very publicly with YouTube censorship of your channel. What happened? What did they tell you? And we know you're back now, but what was that process?
No, it was it was quite interesting actually, because I'm actually writing a book on censorship and in the digital space. I've written previously.
What if they censor it?
Sorry?
What if they censor it?
Well, this was the interesting part, because I've written other books on related topics, and then with the rise of these digital platforms, and it ended up with them canceling my YouTube channel, which was quite surprising, because there was I had no warnings at all, but suddenly they just deleted the channel without any warnings, and the reason for such an abrupt reaction was what they called severe and repeated hate speech, which I thought was very strange, because usually the people I interview are people like Jeffrey Sachs or Jack Matlock, Chas Freeman. Yeah, I never heard anyone uttering any words of hate at all. So this was severe and repeated was a surprise. And well, eventually, I received another email saying after some complaints and possibly some external influence, I got another email saying, "Oh no, there's no hate at all." So we restored it, with a few thousand followers missing, but otherwise, it's very strange, and you're never in contact with another human being. It's all automated emails, so it's very.
I get the impression that that the default mode of companies like YouTube and many others is if they get a flag, it's automatically, or maybe more than one flag of a post, the content is automatically deleted and pending review or pending some kind of appeal, and then maybe somewhere a human being in like Singapore looks at it, and they try to figure out whether or not really it's valid, and then maybe you get restored. It's not a really good system. I mean, we kind of think of due process, and there's just nothing even approximating it. You're guilty and innocent.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can't really complain. You get one appeal, which you can send into YouTube, and then you get another automated reply. No, we reviewed it again, within the next 2 minutes, and it has been decided that it's permanently closed. So it's very frustrating, especially for people who rely on it for their work. So it's it is the new public square, and there's not much you can do to complain. There's no day in court. There's no, you can't explain yourself. It's it's very frustrating.
It's Kafkaesque. Kafka is on trial. He doesn't know why.
Yeah, no, well, this is literally what happened. So I really could not understand. Well, I had one suspicion. That is, I had the last guest I had on, or one of the last two at least, was Alexander Dugin, and I know he's has some books and all banned in the United States. I think it's mainly for his views on the Ukraine war, but again, our conversation was mostly about the challenges of modernity. So his views on why the pre-modern should not be left behind. So we never mentioned the war or Ukraine or anything like this in the entire talk. So But it could be merely that his name popped up and then they delete the whole channel. So it's doesn't make it any better, to be honest.
But I gotta ask you, I mean, since you're over in Norway, um, how do Norwegians view what's happening in the US in terms of the various censorship? I'm sure it's out there in the media. Are you guys experiencing the same thing within your own society, within your own civilization? Is it very different than what's happening here in the US right now?
Well, in Europe, there's no separate or independent digital ecosystem. So whatever digital platforms used in the United States is the exact same ones we use here, only that the decision making here would be even further away. But there is discussion about this rise of these digital giants and the power they have. But otherwise, the Europeans appear to be very much supportive, at least the European governments, of the idea of content moderation, as they say, and deplatforming, having not just right of speech, but responsibility of speech, all of this kind of slogans. So a good example would be the EU's, what we call him, the censorship czar. I think his official title is something different. It's but anyways, he actually sent an email to a letter to Elon Musk before he was interviewing Donald Trump, because they suspected there might be hate speech and there might be disinformation. So they asked him not to even post the interview live. So a way of censoring before it happens. So it's it kind of shows the direction we're going. So a lot of the EU leaders, at least, they seem to be applauding the decision to censor.
Is that across all political parties, across the whole spectrum, that you're noticing in Europe, or is it one party more so than the other or others?
Well, it tends to be the incumbents, the people currently in power, but you have people on the left and the right usually who contest some of this. And as in all other areas, be it security, economy, or free speech, you see as the political center continues to ignore what the public wants, it creates a vacuum which is filled by people on the left and right. Not some of them are good, some of them are not great, but nonetheless, this is the general direction you're going, as people often feel that the political elites as well as the media begin to distance themselves a bit too far from the public.
Centrism and reasonable are usually equated in discourse in the mainstream corporate media in the West, right? And that's kind of like what you see here, right? Like, same thing in the United States, of course, obviously. It's centrist Democrats, corporate Democrats, and centrist corporate Republicans who are in favor of controlling speech. And then, it's so funny because then the left and the right, which are portrayed as extreme, are actually, when it comes to free speech, far more reasonable.
Yeah, we have this phenomenon now, which is the radical center, in which the people actually in power, but they tend to push very extreme policy. If you look at the Germans, for example, they call the far left and the far right, which is everyone from Sarah Wagenknecht to AfD. They're the extreme on the left and right, but they're the ones pushing for peace. They're the one pushing for supporting national industry and supporting free speech, while the radical center effectively, they do the exact opposite. They don't want to talk about peace. They're criminalizing diplomacy. They're not following their national interests, see their industries collapsing, and of course being very gung-ho on censorship. So
like Annalena Baerbock.
I just want to add, there's a lot of course a lot of reasons. Yeah, since she kind of embodies the radical center ideal, but no, it's things are going the wrong direction. But it's you can't keep going like this forever, and this is why they see now the opposition rising in the polls, but they're not ready to give up on power yet. So when you look in France, for example, the party coming in third, which is Macron, they still demand the right to rule, while in Germany, the main opposition, AfD, they're considering whether or not they should ban it. So there's an effort to prevent new reality from asserting itself, but it's just going to make the backlash come so much harder when it eventually breaks through.
So, what do you think is the motivation of these like militant moderates gone wild? Is it is this just naked self-interest, or do they actually believe that there is a danger to their societies from what they call misinformation or disinformation? You know, is it just a put on to try to maintain control and their own prerogatives, or do they really think that the a gullible public is being suckered by lies, and that they are the benevolent, arbiters that who will be able to prevent those lies from spreading?
I think it's both. I think some of it's genuine concern about the new digital technologies, the different platforms, that the gatekeepers are effectively gone who can filter between what is true and what is false. So some of this can be seen as being legitimate, but of course what they're asking for is complete empowerment of governments, as well as who've been caught lying throughout the few years now. So if you really want, I'm not saying that's not a problem with fake news and disinformation, but usually the way it works is you have bad ideas being countered by good ideas. Instead,
Right.
we now see governments want to set up their own fact checkers, which are ideologues. Governments wants to decide what is real. Sometimes governments sign up in partnerships. For example, Facebook sets up partnership with a lot of the mainstream media, which effectively then giving the power to censor their opposition. They're now their rivals in the alternative media. So why should New York Times and Washington Post have the authority to effectively blacklist digital platforms by giving these blacklists to Google so they can trim their algorithms? So there's a lot of problems. And also, if you see governments now demanding the right to determine what is true, what is real, like a Ministry of Truth, it's very problematic. If you see over the past few years how much this has been abused for political reasons. I mean, even Mark Zuckerberg has admitted that the Biden administration pressured him Facebook, that is, to censor real news, the satire, humor, and also the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was election interference. There's no other word for it. They saw this being a bad back in 2020.
And he still does, I might add,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Facebook still throttles political speech. Just about a week or two ago, Zuckerberg was quoted in the New York Times saying that he doesn't think users are interested in political speech. I'm like, well, I find that very difficult to believe, particularly during an election year.
He lives in a different world, Ted. He actually has a bunker, a multi-million-dollar bunker being built in Hawaii. So he lives in a different world, surrounded by different people. So I don't think he's like, a very I hope it's like normal person.
Dr. No, like with the awesome window with the sharks swimming by. I mean, the thing is though, he's like, and as a political cartoonist, my Facebook feed, I'll put a political cartoon up on Facebook that would have gone viral on X. But on Facebook, it'll get 3 likes, right? Then I post something about my cat, I get 1,000 likes. So you can tell. I mean, look, he's a great looking cat, but still.
Well, once they find out he's a Russian blue, it's over.
That's true.
If you hashtag Russian blue,
I don't let them know that. I call him a Ukrainian blue.
Oh, okay. That might help. Yes, for safety purposes, so you're not, demoted on the.
And I don't want him to be droned.
But this leads us to the next topic, is that, and I think this is tangentially all related because of the Ukrainian war, and Glenn, earlier this year, we started seeing American mainstream media, such as the, what do they call it? It's not the breakfast show, but it's
Charlemagne the God is the. Oh yeah.
Mika Brzezinski,
Morning Joe,
and Morning Joe, and Joe Scarborough. Even they were starting to pull back their rhetoric on Ukraine winning, and they started, I felt like, telling the truth about what was happening on the ground. But here we are 9 months later from the new year, or 10 months later at this point. And again, we're seeing a new surge of this American mainstream media going back to their old rhetoric of saying Ukraine's going to come through at the end. And now we're starting to see, coincidentally, a lot of censorship and this latest round of sanctions by the Biden-Harris administration, specifically towards mine and Ted's old employers, right? We had the effective closure of RT Productions here again, as well as Sputnik this time. This was announced September 13th, and the language was quite nebulous, and it just all encompassing. Anything can be considered, aiding and abetting the Russians.
And by the way,
paraphrasing.
no assertion in the case of Sputnik of any violation of American law. No claim of any violation of American law, much less any evidence of it. Literally, the U.S. government does not say that Sputnik did anything wrong. Just
right, but that's the point of the sanctions. I mean, if you read through them on state.gov, they specifically do not qualify their language. They specifically leave it broad, so that way they can just accuse anybody and every entity of, quote, helping the Russian Federation. It could be anything.
And what's particularly terrifying is, like, our former boss over there, he told me that he wanted to hire an attorney. I mean, of course, I have to say, I told him to do this 5 years ago, but he wanted to hire an attorney to fight this. Look, the First Amendment protects all media outlets in the United States, or supposedly does, against direct U.S. government censorship, which is what this is, including foreign outlets, right? But, CBC, BBC, et cetera, they did not, but now with this happening, I guess he waited a little too late. And now he can't even hire attorneys because the bank accounts are frozen, right?
Right.
So there's no way, attorneys don't work for free, for the most part. So not for this kind of case. So maybe spilled hot coffee all over himself, sure, but not for this.
This is effectively censorship by way of sanctions, right? A kind of a workaround, because we are American citizens and we have freedom of speech, but they can say they're not censoring us. But these are sanctions placed on business entities based in Moscow. Why would the Biden-Harris administration do this in the 11th hour, as Biden is about to sunset and retire, and who knows what's going to happen in 2.5 weeks? Why would the Biden administration take this final swipe at Russia by basically eliminating American jobs?
And by the way, in a really, I got to say, what I don't understand is why they were so scared of RT and Sputnik, considering that the viewership was infinitesimal. I mean, very, very, it's not like it had broad access. It probably could have done better if it had been better promoted. But, it was a blip. It wasn't moving many.
Yeah,
even if it was all propaganda all the time, it wasn't propagandizing many people.
No, well, I'm a bit surprised by how quickly everything was normalized as well. Only a few years ago, people thought in the U.S. freedom of speech was it was guaranteed, but it is the government can't censor, but corporations can, and so I think they can go around it by, as Zuckerberg, as I said before, admitted that the government tells them to censor, and they pressure to censor, and then the government pretends as if they're still following the law. So. Yeah, so it is strange how this was normalized, because it began so quietly. I always go back to the Alex Jones example, how it's very recent. It was 2018 when we began with this, deplatforming, as if it's removing dangerous speech, and look how normal it is now. People disappearing off the internet left and right, and it's just the way it is. No, it's I think a key reason behind this is. That in the past it was easier to defend freedom of speech, because in the past international media was dominated by US and British media. So I think especially from the late 2000s, when you had the Al Jazeera's, RTs, all this coming up, there was more pressure to reassert control over the media, because if you follow the media these days, there's very few facts you get. Instead they have narratives. It's all these big narratives, and when you don't follow the narrative, the consequences are quite radical. And I see it in this country too. If I, as an academic, let's say I point out that NATO escalations in Ukraine, then the Russians are doing horizontal escalations, so sending weapons to Iran, or making a weapons deal with North Korea. then they say, well, why are you legitimizing it by presenting it as a reaction? You're rationalizing it. You are, why are you taking the side of authoritarian governments against democracy? So you can't even make a statement about an objective reality. This is how the Russians see it, that we're escalating, and this is how they're responding. But you're not allowed to do it because it counters the main narrative, which is, we're there just to help, and we're not involved in this. And if they're helping the Iranians, it's because authoritarians are coming together to fight freedom. It becomes ridiculous after a while, and everything is about the fear of legitimizing the opponent, which means you can't actually discuss their main security concerns.
Yeah, and Glenn, as we said, this is why would they even bother? I mean, Biden is obviously no longer the nominee. We're 2.5 weeks out. I
Manila,
honestly
I think
know.
I have a theory, right? So after 9/11, Dick Cheney and buttonholed George W. Bush in the immediately, like within 24 hours of the attacks, and said we have to attack Iraq right away. But they didn't, right? They attacked Afghanistan first, and then they went into Iraq about 1.5 years later. And at the time, I was obsessed with that. I went to Afghanistan, and my theory there was Afghanistan was a dry run. It was a country that they knew, the neocons knew that they could easily, dominate and take over, although obviously they lost in the long run. But they knew they could invade it easily. The country didn't have an air force. It was not going to be able to resist. It was basically had 14th century technology. I think this is like that. If you're going to start a regime of censorship of media organizations, you're going to start with a small one. TikTok is huge, and notice all the pushback to the congressional attempt to ban TikTok in the United States or force a sale to a U.S. entity, right? But TikTokers, there's millions of them. Many of them earn
billions.
TikTok, yeah, and a lot of people make money off of it, and they're really angry, they're pissed off. So that's creating pressure that the people who watch and enjoy, and the few of us who made a living off of RT and Sputnik can't do. We can't summon that degree of outrage. Russia's an easy target. It's sort of like how in the 1970s they started out by censoring porn, right? I mean, porn. You go with the soft target, the one that nobody cares about, the one that the mainstream media will say, well, they're not real journalists. You start with them, and then it's first. It's the Martin Niemöller quote. First, they came for the Russians, and I didn't say anything because I didn't care about the Russians, and I supported Ukraine. Next, they came for. That's my theory. I think it was easy.
What do you think, Glenn?
I think you're correct, and I think this is how censorship also works. You don't suddenly one day break one of the most sacred traditions. It has to go through. They began not even with Russia, but with Iran. The U.S. government began to seize some of the online domains of Iranian media, removing it. No one's going to support the Iranians, so then they go after the Russian media, even banning it as they've done now. And then they, of course, begin to force TikTok to be sold or banned. Then they're pressuring censorship on Al Jazeera and move along to Africa stream censoring. So it's this gradual, and they also do this domestically against their own public. That is, you begin with someone like Alex Jones, because he was really the main one to be deplatformed. And a lot of people didn't like him. I mean, he had some very rude opinions. I always point to Sandy Hook as being the best one.
Yes.
So he's seen as a fringe character. Everyone sees him as controversial, and then nobody wants to stand up for him because of how he uses free speech. So you pick him off. People think, of course, we see how he's the extreme on the outside. So everyone thinks this is the exception. This is where we draw the line, and they don't see that this is the precedent. Because if we can knock him out, then why not this guy as well? And then suddenly you expand it more and more to the point now where the government's effectively doing it very much in the open. And it's, so I think the incrementalism is definitely the way censorship goes.
Well, I mean, Julian Assange is a prime example, right? I mean, for the last 15 years or so that he's been in hot water. I mean, thankfully he's free now. But again, hardly anybody really spoke out for pushing for his freedom, right? And doing what he did was truly, exemplary journalism. And he was demonized. And I would say that was the canary in the coal mine. And it has been exploited with every US president since then, with Barack Obama, and then, Mike Pompeo under Donald Trump, who actually plotted to kidnap him from the Ecuadorian embassy to murder him for the crime of journalism. And then, of course, Joe Biden has been an absolute horror to free speech and alternative media. And my fear, because I really don't know which way this election is going to go in 2.5 weeks, but I fear that if Kamala Harris does win, that she will be abhorrent on freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and will further continue what Joe Biden has already begun. Any final thoughts?
I agree with you, but not that Donald Trump will be very different, right? Glenn, I want to
that's what I'm saying.
that. I mean, Donald Trump literally said that he wants to use the military and the National Guard against the enemies within. That's broadly, vaguely defined. Obviously, Donald Trump just says a lot of things to see what sticks to the wall. But I mean, he obviously, it's not Democrats aren't wrong when they point out that Trump has some authoritarian tendencies.
Yeah, but I think before the two of you asked why I think Biden would do this on his way out, but I really don't think that he's in full control of the policies of the government, and I think Kamala Harris would be to a large extent a front figure. What's interesting with Trump is seems a few people control him, but that doesn't mean he's going to have better policies. It just means that he's more difficult to control. But I mean. This is why I was fascinated by how the media worked with Biden as well. Look what they did to him. He was stating he would not step down. He would stay in the race. A few hours later, he's tweeting his resignation, with his staff didn't know. Kamala Harris, no one cared about her for 4 years. She was an embarrassment, and suddenly overnight she becomes a rock star. And it's just it's all fake in my view. This is. And Biden, of course, has disappeared. Who sees him anymore? He's barely on the TV. People not talking him up anymore now. Yeah, so it's all great media management. But this is the problem, because whenever they want to censor someone, they use these terms like propaganda or hate. But no one defines these concepts to decide when you have breached that line, and also which you need also for consistency. So by, for example, calling all Russian media propaganda, this is propaganda means nothing now. It means contesting the argument of the
dissenting
of the political elites. So this is what whenever I'm accused of Russian propaganda as well, it's usually if I say even something benign, like the Russians consider NATO to be their main threat to their security. Every political party in Russia recognizes this, sees it. It's been recognized by many Western leaders, but nonetheless, if you say it, they say, well, that's what the Russians are saying. Now you're repeating Putin's lines. We're not saying it, so now you're spreading propaganda. This is a very weird definition of propaganda.
So strange. NATO was created
conform to government statements.
NATO was created to oppose the Soviet Union. That was its purpose. Listen to NATO,
Final thoughts, Glenn, and we're letting you go. I'm putting your book on the screen there so people can see your newest book. I know you're working on one more. Final thoughts on all of this as we barrel into the U.S. 2024 elections very soon. Any final thoughts or predictions from Norway?
No, not many. I think it could go either way. I think I think a lot of people don't want to. In the United States, they see that things are going the wrong way. I think every polling shows this well. The country is going in the wrong direction, and I think it's very hard to convince people that Kamala Harris will be very different from Biden. But I still think people are quite cautious about what could come from Trump. But But I think it's going to be. I would probably put my money on Trump because
Really?
the biggest warning against him in 2020 was he was going to start, a nuclear war with Iran, or take the world to war. But now we're seeing it's the Biden-Harris administration that's taking us to the brink of nuclear war with the Russians. Probably we might have a war now with the Iranians over the next few weeks. It's just. I think people just willing to gamble on anything else, not necessarily having the greatest trust in Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's always the argument of which one is the least worse for us to choose from, and here we are again, and it seems to never ever change in the U.S. I don't know how to explain that for our population, but Professor, I know you got to go. I appreciate your time, Professor Glenn Diesen. Thank you so much. He's a professor of political science and history at the University of Oslo in Norway. His newest book, right there on the screen, is out now. It is called The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order. Thank you so much, Glenn.
Buy the book.
My pleasure. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.